In post-war America, there's those moments where if something is manufactured, if something comes out of a factory, it is inherently better.
Right.
So like white bread, Wonder Bread was great, and it was kind of, an aspiration, as opposed to peasant bread, which was dark and grainy and like imperfect. What you wanted was something
better living through science.
That's right. Yeah. And it's like untouched. We want food that is untouched by human hands, and we want formula because that's got to be better. If it comes out of a lab, it's good. Now that's totally reversed.
Yeah. I mean, and so I think that's great to a degree. Like I said, I lived in Brooklyn in 2009 through 13. And this was, peak, like people farming on rooftops and making their own kombucha and drinking it out of mason jars and all that, and butchering their own like hogs in some weird like butcher shops. My boyfriend was a big butcher, trend person.
Was this underground as well? Or was it kind of,
figuratively or literally?
Was it licensed butchering?
Yes,
or
yes. No, like all of a sudden in like Greenpoint and Williamsburg, there were all these like, do your own butchering classes and stuff.
Yeah.
And so like, I think that was, I'm very pro that trend. Like I definitely got taken in by that, but it's just really funny to me how like it was very left coded. There's no reason it was left coded. Like there's nothing inherently leftist. In fact, you could say like a lot of this stuff like is sort of like back to the land, back to traditional ways. Like it's actually sort of conservative. Right. But because of the people who were doing it, which was like young, like liberal leaning people in like urban areas, like it became left coded. And now you see the exact same aesthetic, like except now it's all like Mormons doing it. So it's very right coded. It's trad wives.
Why did hipster lefties or people who coded left, why did they get into, smoking American Spirit cigarettes or rolling their own and butchering their own meat? Like, where did that imperative come from? I mean,
part of it was just this whole like slow food movement that was happening, Michael Pollan and all of that, like of the era. I also think that the recession had a big thing, had a lot to do with it,
How so?
Just everybody was kind of feeling like the music changed. The music all became very like folky, and everything became about like, sort of, getting away from the offices, getting away from this like capitalist system and just sort of, making your own food, having local currencies. Like everything was about being localized. And I think there was very much a big mood in response to sort of like global events that people felt like they couldn't control.
Does the ideology of Occupy give rise to a kind of slow food movement or vice versa? Or are they all of a piece with one another?
I think it's the same impulse, right? Like this impulse to sort of be like, we're going to, unplug from this like, this big sort of a elitist system that we don't really trust and can't control.
Let's talk about how did things start shifting rightward? Because you're totally right that this stuff, which was considered, this was a sign that you were a leftist in good standing. Now it's like you're a MAGA, Maha power user or something like that. What are the steps that it ends up turning right?
Some of the more plausible, theories that people talked about. I mean, a big one is COVID, and but I think it started before COVID. So we can come back to that, but like partly is that like the left started seeding like CED, seeding this territory to nobody at the time, because suddenly, we had the rise of the body positivity movement, and you had the rise of like various concerns about cultural appropriation and various concerns about privilege, and these sort of more, I guess you'd call them like social justice-y, or maybe now we'd call them woke or whatever you want to call them. But these sort of concerns started taking over what was like appropriate in sort of left-leaning spheres.
So is that like if you go to Whole Foods, which is already kind of corporate and capitalist, but if you go to your local co-op and they have a certain type of Latin American or South American crop, maybe, on the left, you're like, maybe I shouldn't be eating this.
Right. And before, like with Michael Pollan and that whole thing, it was like, like let's all just do home cooking. Like let's all cook different flavors and different whole foods and things like that. And then suddenly it was like, well, wait a second, like, those chickpeas, like that's actually like, that's from this culture. Like you need to credit them. And maybe if you're like a white person, you can't even cook them. And like, like there was this cookbook author, Alison Roman, who got like excoriated for calling something a stew when actually like it was a curry and she should have credited that.
That's a big problem.
You'd see in the comments of like places like Jezebel and stuff, like someone would be like, it doesn't take that much money. Like people would be like, it's privileged to eat healthy. You can't, people can't all eat healthy. And then someone else would come in and be like, well, you can get a can of beans or you can get some lentils and they're really cheap actually, and anybody can cook them. And then some other people come in and be like, well, maybe like someone doesn't have a stove, or maybe they don't have the time to cook them, or, you know, maybe they don't have arms. Like, it just like devolved into this whole thing where like you couldn't win this argument